How does Canada navigate relations with China if we can't even manage a, I guess, face-to-face meeting with the Chinese president at the G20 meeting? I mean, I understand that we're in this position where we are not a superpower, but is that disrespectful to us?
Of course it is. It's intended to be. There's not a lot we can do about it. We can't force them to meet with us. We can't force them to get, to release the basically hostages they've taken, the two Canadians. So it is, to be fair to anybody who would be in government right now in Canada, it's a very difficult situation. I think where you can perhaps fault the present government is the Chinese government seems to be of the belief that one way or another, if they apply enough pressure, that we will yield, that we will release the Huawei executive, the daughter of the founder, from her house arrest right now for extradition hearings. How they got that idea, I think, can be to some extent laid at the feet of the government, but also of other people in the country who've been only too willing over the last few years to try and strike a deal with China on trade, and perhaps have looked a little too eager, and the Chinese have read the signals accordingly.
How can we extricate ourselves from this extradition case? I mean, we're at the mercy of the rule of law.
Yeah, we don't have an easy out on this. All we can do is, it seems to me, is hold fast to the really important things, which is we cannot do deals for hostages. We can do everything we can to try and secure their release by diplomatic means. We can enlist our allies. We can put pressure on China, which China needs us as much or more than we need them, and people should remember this. China is a very small part of our overall trade picture and is likely to remain so for many years to come. But they've got difficult problems with their economy. They have, I think the rest of the world now is quite alarmed at the direction that China is going in. They had a diplomatic opening with us, which they've blown. So we have some leverage, but we're not going to get any instant solutions from this. But certainly the notion that we were going to turn our back on our neighbor, ally, military ally, trade partner, et cetera, the United States, and abrogate our extradition treaty with them, not to mention basically paying ransom, the notion that we were ever going to do that, it seems to me, is absolutely reprehensible, and I hope that's off the table firmly.
I'm going to borrow a word from you. Allies, one of our allies is the U.S., of course, and the U.S. president suggesting that he would help Canada with respect to the detainees. So we are now forming this line of communication through the U.S. president.
Yeah, and there's some potential, I suppose, for some kind of arrangement there. Obviously, ultimately, this will come down to what does the United States want to do. But this is a judicial process. The president of the United States can't just snap his fingers and end a prosecution. But there may be larger negotiations, I suppose, that could go on. Whether he gave any kind to talk about it at all in his meeting with President Xi, I don't know. He said he would, but Donald Trump's not known for keeping his promises. I note that when he was asked whether he raised the question of Hong Kong and the future of Hong Kong, which is a very desperate situation right now, he said, "Oh, we talked about it briefly," which is remarkable when you compare to past U.S. presidents. I think of John F. Kennedy in Berlin, making that famous speech about "Ich bin ein Berliner." What a long way we've fallen in terms of the willingness and ability of an American president to stand up for freedom. But of course, what we've seen with Trump is he's a groupie for dictators. He likes hanging out with other autocrats. He's mercifully not able to, I think, exercise that impulse to the degree he would like to the United States. But he certainly likes their kind, likes hanging out with them.
A meeting that the Prime Minister did have is with the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. And I'm wondering if that's a step in, I guess, the right direction or a positive direction now, because we saw a little bit of frosty relations between our two countries last year on the heels of the Prime Minister's trip to India, and he was criticized also for some missed trading opportunities. So I'm wondering if that bodes well for our relations.
I hope so, and it's a little late in the day, but better late than never. I mean, this government made a decision, a calculation early on in its tenure, I suppose before it became government, that China was the next rising power. This was and this was the mood of the time. It's only a few years ago, but that China was the stronger horse. The United States was fading. We needed to get behind China. And they made very strong overtures. At one time, you'll remember, there was even talk of an extradition treaty between Canada and China, which is so crazy viewed in current light. It's just remarkable it was ever even considered. And they neglected, it seems to me, the Indian relationship. Now, if you took the longer term, you might well say that India is more likely to be the stronger economy 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. They're growing faster now. Their population is going to be larger than China's before the century is out. They're a democracy. They're much more in the nature of a strategic ally than China is. They speak English to a great degree, and that is a huge asset for them in terms of exports, et cetera. So the choice between China and India is an interesting one, and I thought one of the most telling comments about the India trip and the shenanigans that went on there, and I think he deserved to take a roasting for some of the silliness that went on there, is he would never have done that in China. In other words, China was a place you treated seriously. India was a place you posed for photo ops. Now, in fairness, it's not going to be easy to strike a free trade deal with India either. They have a long history of protectionism. They are slowly unbundling some of that, but it's a complicated society with a very complicated system of government, federal, provincial, that kind of thing. And it will not be easy to get them interested, but it seems to me that's where we ought to be putting more of our efforts.
We're in an election year, a couple of months away from the federal election. The Prime Minister met with the U.S. President's daughter, Ivanka Trump, I guess at a session on women's empowerment. So once again, are we seeing the government, positioning their platform around this issue again leading into the election?
We certainly will be seeing them hammering home on questions of gender. Yes, they clearly think that that's a strong point for them. They certainly, I think it's a philosophical core for a lot of people in the government. Ivanka, of course, was everywhere at the G20. Whether people were all that keen to meet her or not is another question. But what we saw previously in a meeting with down in Washington was the government seems willing for perhaps its own interests and as a sop to the U.S. administration to kind of give some credence to the idea that somewhere in the Trump administration, in Ivanka and others, there's somebody who's interested in women's empowerment. I think there's precious little evidence of that in terms of the policies they pursue, but it seems to be something that's a talking point that at least Ivanka likes to advance, and her father, I guess, on her behalf, and we seem to be willing to indulge that for some reason.